As Pfizer continue to rake in the billions, are we allowed to criticise Big Pharma yet? Or does it still make you a crazed anti-vax conspiracy theorist? They like money. Hello there, you 5.5 million awakening wonders. Thank you for joining me on this particular quest, moving to pinnacles of truth, acknowledging contradiction and the complexity of truth and the nuances of looking at something from a multivalent perspective. If you're not a subscriber yet, subscribe right now. Hit me up in the comments below. Tell us what kind of things you want to see covered. And remember, if I reply to you going, hey, can I have some money? That's not me. I don't want your money. I just want you to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. I'm not Pfizer that'll do anything for a pound note or a dollar bill, although maybe you think they do a lot of good work. Certainly there's some ingenuity involved in the world of pharmacology and medicine. Let's look at the numbers, let's look at the figures, let's make a decision together. Pfizer has made nearly $26 billion in revenues in the first 3 months of the year. The bulk from its COVID-19 vaccine and new pill to treat the virus, prompting fresh accusations of pandemic profiteering. That's interesting, isn't it? It doesn't make you a conspiracy theorist, does it? Does it make the Guardian conspiracy theorist to say that Pfizer could be profiting, or I suppose worse, profiteering? I suppose that means the intention is to get profit. But how do these systems operate? How do they function? How much do you need to know about the manufacture of mental health medicines before you can, like me, conclude that if a medicine isn't profitable, becomes complicated to trial and difficult to sell, it's discontinued, whereas a profitable drug like this will be prioritized? What kind of contradictions, what kind of challenges could that lead to? Let's investigate it further. Pfizer has faced criticism over its vaccine pricing and its refusal to waive patent protection. Of course, the patent protection argument emerged when people in certain territories couldn't get access to the vaccines, which of course were lauded as the solution to the global pandemic, but only if you can afford them. So what's your priority then? Is it a solution to the pandemic or is it a profit? Now, some of you watching this will go, well, of course they're going to patent their products. That's how things work. But should they then be given unique status and unique opportunities if ultimately they're essentially a company that exists to make profit? Last week, 35 campaigners from Global Justice Now, ACT UP London, Just Treatment and Stop AIDS protested against what they call pandemic profiteering. So those groups clearly think some profiteering has taken place. The New York-based firm posted total sales of $25.7 billion in the first quarter, up 77% from a year earlier. So whatever the pandemic did to your life, for Pfizer, the pandemic was profitable, and Pfizer exists primarily to make profit. So for Pfizer, the pandemic was a good thing. Of this, $13.2 billion came from the Comirnaty jab it developed with Germany's BioNTech, driven by global uptake, including jabs for children over the age of 5 and booster doses. Pfizer and BioNTech are also seeking US approval for the vaccine's use in children from 6 months to 4 years old. Now, with children who are by their nature vulnerable, who by definition are immature, the requirement for vaccines and the recommendation for vaccines should be undertaken with a degree of severity, circumspection and analysis even more acute than you would apply to adults. You shouldn't vaccinate children likely unless it's necessary, unless it's proven to be beneficial, and if you're certain that the pandemic is still at a phase that warrants it. The only real counter-argument to that, unless you can demonstrate its necessity, is that it's profitable to do that. Then what you have to decide is, do you think that Pfizer would lobby? Is there anything in current political systems that suggest that Pfizer would lobby for outcomes favourable to their profit model to be undertaken? A further $1.5 billion came from Paxlovid, a COVID pill for people who are at high risk of severe disease, including hospitalisation or death. The treatment received emergency approval from the US regulator in late December and has been cleared by the UK and EU. Pfizer has made tens of billions of dollars during the pandemic from its COVID-related products, as has the Boston-based biotech firm Moderna, which was loss-making until it started selling a COVID-19 vaccine. If your company is losing money, then a COVID pandemic comes along, what level of objectivity can you afford Moderna in a situation upon which they are financially dependent? I'm not saying that vaccines aren't fantastic and necessary. I'm not saying that Moderna and Pfizer aren't terrific companies. I'm not saying that the pandemic hasn't been aided and that vaccination isn't necessary or lockdowns or masks. I've got no opinions on any of those things. I'm observing situations and my opinions are changing all the time. Simply, I'm saying that in a crisis that warranted unique measures, that granted unusual, unprecedented powers to governments. And also, we now know, rewarded massive pharmaceutical companies with hitherto unseen profits. There has to be a degree of accountability. There has to be transparency around their trial process. And I would say there should be unique measures in place around those profits. My personal suggestion would be that a significant amount of profits from the pandemic should go back into communities damaged by the pandemic, small businesses ravaged by the pandemic, mental health crisis created by the pandemic, the addiction crisis exacerbated by the pandemic. Do you think those are good ideas or terrible ideas? Do you think that Moderna and Pfizer should just keep all that money that they got in some cases, because even if drugs weren't mandated, they were heavily imposed? You know, you can't travel to certain places, right, if you're not vaccinated, so it's kind of necessary for you to have those vaccines. You know, new information is emerging all the time around efficacy, certainly not stuff I want to talk about here or now, but information that warrants an ongoing conversation, whether it's Johnson & Johnson's surveys and tests around natural immunity, around the amount of vaccination. I'm not offering you conclusions. I'm saying there's an ongoing conversation. And I'm saying when big business is supported by government in such an overt way, there's a level of accountability required that I do not see taking place. Tim Beerley, a pharma campaigner at Global Justice Now, said, throughout the pandemic, Pfizer has refused to share its technology and know-how. Instead, it has maintained monopoly control over its vaccine and treatment, keeping a chokehold on global supply. And choking people in a respiratory pandemic is surely irresponsible. Despite calls from campaigners to allow countries in the global south to manufacture their own vaccines and treatments, Pfizer continues to put profit over people's health. They're saying, if vaccines are so great, give them to everybody. Oh no, because it's a business ultimately. Fair enough, let's be honest about that then. Once you admit that something exists primarily for profit, then you have to look at the history of pharmaceutical companies and see if in the past their thirst for profit has ever led them to be irresponsible or make mistakes or cut corners with trials or produce and release products that were not entirely beneficial. All these questions, I believe, are on the table now that we know that the primary function of Pfizer, a pharmacological corporation, is to make profit. This shouldn't be a revelation to anyone. This isn't conspiracy theories. I don't think they're making this stuff on Mars or turning us into aliens or any of that stuff. I'm saying that when their priority is profit, when they're aided by government in the way that they are, there's a requirement for transparency, and I would say a degree of regulation and even redistribution when it comes to profit. Unique problem, unique situation, unique legislation around redistribution. That would be my campaign if I was running for office. Fortunately, I'm not, because I'm crazy. Pfizer's revenues last year doubled to $81.3 billion, and it expects to make record sales of $98 to $102 billion this year, half of which will come from COVID products. How do you think that makes them regard vaccines? How do you think that makes them regard mandates? How will their lobbyists be treating people in Congress around issues of mandating or perhaps relaxing the calls for COVID passports? How will the power and swelling might of these organisations be deployed when it comes to government regulation? What do you think lobbying is? A type of hobby? It's not hobbying, it's lobbying. They lobby people in order to reach certain outcomes, to influence political process, to see regulations and laws introduced that will be favourable to their business and prevent laws being introduced that will not be favourable to their business. And if individual freedom has to suffer for that, then that's just a byproduct, a consequence. And if there are health complications, that too is affordable if what you're in the pursuit of is profit. So the very fact that there is a lobbying industry, the very fact that there is this amount of profit being garnered is reason for analysis, scrutiny, and reason to stay awake, even if this is no longer a fashionable story at the forefront of your mind. On the issue of sharing intellectual property, Pfizer said others would struggle to produce its mRNA vaccine, one of only 2 on the market, arguing that it's not as simple as sharing the recipe. Well, why don't you try it and see? How do you think these things work? What do you think are their priorities? And what do you think self-interest and greed of this degree generates? Let me know in the comments below. This is from Nick Dearden, who is the director of Global Justice Now. For a company that was until recently the least trusted company in the least trusted industrial sector in the United States, COVID-19 has been a PR coup. Companies like Pfizer behave more like hedge funds, buying up and controlling other firms and intellectual property rather than traditional medical research companies. At the root of the Pfizer model are a set of intellectual property rules laid down in trade deals. These effectively allow big pharma corporations to operate as monopolies with no responsibility to share the knowledge they own, however much society needs it. The truth is They aren't the sole inventors of the vaccine. That was the work of public money, university research, and a much smaller company, Germany's BioNTech. As one former US government official complained, the fact we call it the Pfizer vaccine is the biggest marketing coup in the history of American pharmaceuticals, and that's up against some pretty stiff competition. A US Government Accountability Office report the previous year noted that the industry model is increasingly to simply buy up smaller firms that have already developed products. This allows them to monopolise the knowledge and maximise the price of the resulting medicines. Pfizer are a force for monopolisation. They centralise other people's research and they operate by aggregating all sorts of various medical breakthroughs, some successful, some not. What is it about Pfizer that means that they oughtn't be held accountable and they oughtn't be criticised? How is it that this pandemic has allowed Goliaths of the financial sphere to be regarded as saints and deities exempt from criticism? How is it that this pandemic operated as a kind of catalyst, a topsy-turvy hall of mirrors that made powerful corporations exempt from criticism, that made figures that clearly are interested in profit turned into saints, and made anyone that criticised them, myself included, subject to mudslinging and smears? Answers in the comments, please. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla said recently that a fourth dose of the COVID-19 vaccine will be necessary to continue to help keep hospitalizations manageable and sicknesses more mild. How can he possibly be objective when he is bound by the pursuit of profit in the manner that the system that he is a part of requires? What I'm saying is, as long as you have systems that encourage, that instantiate, that demand a kind of corruption, profiteering so galling that it warps and influences the experience of billions of people. If you have that amount of authority, if your marketing opportunity is of that scale, backed by mandate, then surely a degree of responsibility and a degree of redistribution is necessary. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla said recently that a fourth dose of the COVID-19 vaccine will be necessary to continue to help keep hospitalizations manageable and sicknesses more mild. Despite debate among scientists and a lack of evidence either for or against another booster. So in the event that there's no evidence for it or against it, what would you prefer if you worked at Pfizer or you were a Pfizer shareholder? For? Some scientists warned that the plan could backfire because too many shots might cause a sort of immune system fatigue, compromising the body's ability to fight the coronavirus. But as long as it doesn't affect profits, who cares? Pfizer is among the big pharma companies trying to block legislation strengthening whistleblowers' ability to report corporate fraud. Why would that be? Why would that be? Surely, if you're an honest mom-and-pop style pharmaceutical corporation, what you want is whistleblowers. What you want is transparency. It will benefit you. It will help you to run a better business, unless you've got something to hide. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Isn't that what they tell us when they want us to put chips in our foreheads? Pfizer spent nearly $11 million lobbying the federal government, including Congress, in 2020. Presumably just for a laugh, just to give them a bit of money to pass the time. In 2020, at least 11 senators and 34 representatives held shares in vaccine manufacturer Pfizer. So I suppose in order for us to feel confident in Pfizer as a company and in our governments as a whole, you would want some redistribution of those enormous unprecedented profits that were brought about as a result of a unique situation where many people didn't have a choice whether or not to participate in the process of making those profits, whether they were beneficial or not. And it seems like the conversation is going on to some degree about the variations there. And it's certainly not a conversation I'm participating in, I can tell you that. You wouldn't want any Congress people owning shares in any companies that they're regulating. That's absolutely ridiculous. You'd want to see an end to lobbying immediately. These ideas are not pie in the sky. They're not impossible. They're not ridiculous. These are just simple ways of introducing ethics and accountability into a profession that has unique access to your money via the government. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one or this one. If you don't subscribe to this channel, subscribe right now. Turn on the notifications bell. Also, sign up to my mailing list in case I need to talk to you beyond this platform. If you see any answers or replies from me in the comments saying, why don't you buy my cryptocurrency? That's not me. Don't do it. I don't want anything from you except your subscription. Stay free.